Today is March 1st, 2011, and my name is MROHP. I am interviewing Elizabeth Black, who is a current member of the League of Women Voters of Boulder County. She is a past president and a past treasurer, and she's also been active in voter services and membership. This interview is being recorded for the Maria Rogers Oral History Program. The interview is being filmed by MROHP. So Liz, as my first question to you, could you tell us when and where you were born?
Oh, sure. I was born in 1952. Do you want the birth date? September 9th. This was in Champaign. Well, I grew up living in Champaign. I actually was born at the hospital in Urbana, Illinois. Yeah.
Could you tell me a little about your childhood and whether you or other members of your family were involved in civic issues while you were growing up?
It was not something we discussed around the dinner table the way I know my roommate in college said they had a lot of that going on. My parents did volunteer in various organizations in the community. I think I recall my mom serving on some kind of an advisory group for the school district, and she was a little sensitive about it because both her kids went to a parochial school, but she still felt that public schools were important and needed to be supporting, so this was her way to do it. When I first, at some time after I had joined the League, she made the comment to me once that at some point she had joined the League or had inquired about joining the League, but I guess whether she joined or not, she I think felt when she met some of the people involved, she got this feeling that they were really high-powered people, very, and not sure she would fit in, so she did not choose to continue in involvement with the League. But I guess I didn't let that stand in my way. I would say that's certainly been true of the League here. There's a lot of really, I don't know what the word would be, women with a lot of talent and interest and intelligence and involvement in all kinds of aspects. And I think maybe that's one of the things that's attracted me, getting to know some of these people.
And maybe now you could reassure your mother that the League is okay.
Yeah, well, I think, certainly that's what we tell people in membership, is that if you just want to read the newsletter and pay your dues, we're happy to have you as a member. If you want to join 10 committees, that's wonderful. But it's up to you to know what level of involvement suits you.
When and why did you come to Boulder? Since I'm thinking that maybe you did grow up in Illinois?
Yes, I grew up through high school. I was living primarily in Illinois. My family, both my parents, my mom was a housewife, but then when she went back to work, they were both on faculty staff at the university. And my dad took a opportunity to go on an exchange program to India when I was about 8 years old. So the family spent a couple of years in India. But apart from that, I grew up in Illinois. I didn't go too far away for college. I went to college in Iowa. Cornell College is a small liberal arts school. And then went on from there a few years at Iowa State, where I got a master's degree and married the young man who's still my husband, a little older now. But when we were finishing up there, he had the job offer. I didn't have any. We went out to California because that's where the job he took was. I ended up actually working with a company that I had interviewed with on campus. We were there 3 years. Then jobs took us to Connecticut. We were there another 3 years or so. At the end of that time was when our oldest was born. And my husband also had chosen to leave the company that brought him to Connecticut, and he was looking around. One of his former co-workers had moved out to Fort Collins, and Rod had had a business trip out this direction and stopped to see Roy, and was, as he told me, very impressed that after a winter snowstorm, Roy just took the broom and swept off the front walk. Growing up in Illinois and Iowa, where the snow comes and the ice storms and everything, Rod thought that was pretty good kind of winter and kind of snow to have. So he looked for jobs out this way and in some other parts of the country too. But the one that brought us out here was his job with, at the time, was AT&T. So. And since I had an infant at the time, I did not look for work, but more or less focused on, learning what's involved with parenting, and got into some community organizations and did that until my kids were in end of middle school, I think, is when I really started seriously thinking about going back to work.
And had you been involved in the League of Women Voters in the other places that you lived?
No,
so,
I had not.
And you moved to Louisville when you moved to this area?
Yeah, we came here and stayed in a temporary apartment until we had a chance more to look around and decided where we want to go. And this house was the house we purchased. It was being built at the time, so we continued in the apartment for a while until it was ready for us to move in, which was probably, so I think we moved here in February, the house, we had our closing and moved in. So It's been in Louisville ever since.
Do you think that joining the League, when did you join the League?
I first was invited to a League meeting by Linda Holtman, who has kids about the same age as mine, and we were our two younger kids were together in a play group. And so I knew her through that, and she said, "We're having a League meeting, why don't you come?" As I recall, the presentation was Liz Nick talking about the legislative wrap-up, what the lobbyists and the League volunteers that go down and follow bills what they had been following over that session. And they asked me to join, and I joined, and here I am.
Right, and obviously you got very involved because you've had any number of roles to play. So it's kind of a neighborhood connection that got you involved in the League. That's a very interesting pattern that, it's sort of women chatting and talking and bringing each other in and being very open too. Now you've had a number of roles, as I've stated at the beginning, and I'm wondering if you could describe some of the work that you've done, say first as president or co-president, and what that work entailed, and maybe some of your experiences or impressions of being president of the League of Women Voters at that time of Boulder Valley.
When I joined, it was Boulder Valley. I think it was a little bit before maybe a year or two before I had joined, that they had moved from being a Boulder City League to the Boulder Valley, so that they could include following issues in Louisville, Lafayette, on into even the edge of Broomfield and so forth. I think the president's job is made easier in a sense because of the board is there. So the president maybe coordinates, and if things come in, she's sort of the point person, but then, this matter is to be attended to by so-and-so, and so you get things in and you figure out who needs to work on it, and you see that they get it, and chairing the board meetings is a piece of it. official spokesperson. If we have some matter that we feel the league position we can take a stand on and what to put in a letter to the editor or something like that, it's the president's name who is signed at the bottom of it. So I think that's kind of the key features of being president. In some ways, I'm not sure the presidency is as time-consuming as the voter services position, especially during election season. I mean, maybe other seasons it's a toss-up, but election season or before elections, the voter services really can consume inordinate amount of time.
So you're, in some ways, you played the sort of the public face of the league in terms of communications.
Yes, they're very. That's one thing they're very adamant about in all the guidelines, a proper league fashion of doing things. You don't have individual league members coming out and say, well, this is what the league stands for, or, you know, this is the position of the league. It has to come through proper channels. So if it's a local issue, it's the local league presidents. If it's a statewide issue, it's the state president.
Now, when you were the league president, did you attend, say, the national conference and the state conference?
Yes, I have done some of those, but I have done them not being president too, just as a delegate, because I expressed an interest and was able to go at the time they were. I went to one that was held, the national ones in Washington, D.C. The other local delegate that went was Hayden Williamson. So we, roomed together and took a little time away from the meeting to do the sightseeing, and they have the dine around, and that's a chance to informally get to know leaguers from various parts around the country. At one of these dine arounds, another person sitting at the table made the comment that the waiter was quite confused because we had our name tags on, and these name tags would say what your position was in your local league. So he looked around the table, president of such and such, president of such and and was kind of wondering, well, what kind of organization? And it looks like everybody's a president. But then I went to the recent national convention, which was in Atlanta, Georgia. And at that time I was not on the board. I was pretty much the same as I am currently, membership secretary and chairing the Immigration Study Committee. But that year we had a high enough membership that we were allowed 3 delegates, because they apportion them out according to the size of the local leagues. And state leagues send some delegates, local leagues send some delegates.
Is there anything else about being president of the league that was memorable, or anything that you'd like to comment on about being president?
No, I started out as co-president. Like a number of other leagues, we experimented with different ways of governance, and so Deborah Rahm and I went, before we started, they have that kind of a training. At the time it was called the May Clark retreat weekend sort of thing, where the leadership people at the state level invite especially new board members coming on to go to this couple of days set of a lot of workshops, and so that was a good foundation to have starting into the new role, and learned a lot. She was working full-time as a teacher in addition to being my co-president, and eventually found that it just wasn't working for her. So at that point, I kind of felt I knew what was needed to be done and could manage just as president. So we went back to a more traditional type of situation with just one person in the office.
Now, you mentioned this retreat that was to sort of give you some, I guess, education about leadership. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Is that done in every state to help board and other officers of the leagues at the
I'm not
local
really
level?
sure. I think it got started in Colorado because somebody had given some money or left some money in their will, and this was an area where they felt was really important to help develop new leaders, and so that you don't get into the position where you get an aging league and you don't have any new people to come in and bring in new blood and keep perpetuating the organization. So it is good from several standpoints. It brings people together from local leagues all over the state, so you do meet, if I'm there and maybe am going to be beginning a term as voter service or as treasurer, then I can talk to people who have been treasurer or are going to be treasurer at, a league in wherever else in Colorado, and then also hear from the state league people that have been kind of given that task to help with membership and development of the skills.
So in that regard, the League of Women Voters cares very much about sort of preparing women to take leadership roles, and also gives them experiences and tools to really meet the challenges of those offices.
One of the members, at the time she was living in Lafayette and working at a bank over there, but I remember she had a story where, not in this league, but in a league she'd been in a different location before she moved here, and she, at the unit meetings, and I'm sure in some of the interviews you understand what unit meetings are, she was the presenter, and whatever the arrangement was for the location they were to meet, something had gone haywire, so their room where they had counted on meeting wasn't available. So it was a nice day out, and they apparently just said, well, why don't we move to the park nearby and we'll just do the presentation outdoors. And so she found herself in the interesting position of standing up in front of this small group in the park and talking about whatever the topic was, and people going up and down the sidewalk, I guess, heard of it and kind of decided to drew in and listen to more of it. So before she knew it, she had quite a big crowd listening to her presentation. And she was kind of bringing this up with the remark that you may not go into league intending to develop all these skills, but just in the course of what we do, you acquire the skills in just as part and parcel of the league activities.
Yeah, well, another area that you mentioned was membership. And so can we segue into your current role now is in membership chair?
Secretary.
Membership secretary.
We do have a membership director. So basically I assist her. She's the one who probably has a more direct contact with prospective members. She'll give them a call if some members their expiration date is approaching and we're not quite sure whether they will join. She might contact them to just answer any questions or see if there's things that they haven't had an opportunity to do that they would like to do, or anything to kind of keep them interested and to stay with us. My role is more behind the scenes, keeping entering updates to the roster if somebody's changed their name, their phone number, or their email address, stuff like that. Giving her a report every month of what's our current numbers and who's dropped out, who's new, been added, sending out a new membership packet, that kind of thing. So the reason I thought that job was a good fit for me at this stage was because it's all kind of work that I can do on my own schedule. So if I'm working, I can do it on weekends or in the evenings, or it doesn't require me to be there at the board meetings, and so it gives me a lot of flexibility.
Right. And had you worked in membership before, or is this your first?
No, I had not. Well, I mean, as president, as voter service, yes, you do. All the board members, I think, work with each other. So if I was needing to find out, maybe for voter service, I wanted to get a half a dozen people who could help me with making sure that at the libraries and at various distribution points we keep a good supply of our pro and con brochures, things like that. I might go to the membership chair and say, well, who lives in a part of the town that's close to this library, if I didn't know anybody out there, or just starting out not knowing anybody in Lee, because voter service was one of the first tasks I took on. I would ask somebody on the board, well, who might be able to do this? And they might give me 3 or 4 names. So I would call those 3 or 4 people, and maybe they couldn't, the time was wrong. So I'd say, well, who else might you suggest? So it would kind of, I would go down a chain, and if the first people I called couldn't, they'd, give me more to try, and eventually I'd be able to fill the jobs that needed to be done.
Speaking of membership, you've been a member for any number of years, right? At least 20,
I think it's
20?
close to 25 because
25 years, okay.
Right. Prue had asked me for the list of people with significant anniversaries to come up, so they like to recognize them at the annual meetings. I was kind of surprised to see I was up 25 already. But.
Well, in your experience over the years, maybe what other people have talked to you about, but also from your own observation, what changes have you seen in the membership of, or any significant changes in the membership at the League here in Boulder County?
Well, we're always glad when we get some relatively younger people in, because, with the older membership, it happens, people die, and if we want to keep our numbers, we always have to keep recruiting more people in. Word of mouth seems to be one of the best ways. I think there is a difference, certainly even from before my time, in my mother's generation, say, I don't think as many, well, clearly not as many women worked. So they could take on significant roles in the League and be able to devote a lot of time to it. Now, I think there's a real need to be conscious of the time constraints that our members face and try to divvy up what needs to be done in small chunks that people can manage within the time that they are able to give. I think there isn't a real effort for members who have been in for a while to accommodate new, younger people coming in. And, for example, a committee might have been meeting in the daytime, but if they have an expression of interest from a new member, I've known of a case where a committee switched to evening meetings just so that they could keep that person and draw them in and get them more involved. If it made it more convenient, they would meet in the evenings, by golly. So.
Yeah, so there is that sense of really including.
Trying to. It's always something we could do better at, but yeah, I think that's something we have to make an effort to do.
Yeah, I've just heard a number of stories now of how people got involved with League, and as you said, just a friend just said, well, why don't you try it, know? And it seems like that's a great way of outreach for people, get people in, and then trying to accommodate them with different schedules and
or places or whatever. And of course sometimes we have to do it at the other extreme. If we have elderly people that want to be involved but they can't drive at night, either we'll try to arrange to somebody pick them up and take them along when they go to the meeting so that they would go together, or maybe move to a daytime that's easier for them to manage, whatever it is. So
now, in 1974, the League did decide to allow men to join, and I'm wondering if, in your experience, that has either proved to be a plus, a minus, or has not meant that much, or?
We have some men who have joined kind of to support their wives who are very active members, but have not been very active themselves. We have others where I think a husband and wife, but it's the man who's kind of the person with the main interest, and the wife is there more maybe to give the man credibility, you know. So you get different situations. I would say currently, of the men I can think of, one of the more active ones is Bruce McKenzie, and you know, he's taken on the I think he's program director currently, and has done quite well with that particular role. But his wife had, he's a widower now, but she and, well, they had hosted meetings at their house for years. That particular time for those meetings were not convenient for them, so I think he typically went to a different unit than the one that was hosted at their house. But it's nice to see that he's found that is something that he has kept on doing even after she's passed on, and has certainly benefited from his involvement.
Since you sort of have an insider view about the membership list, could you say what percent maybe of this league is male?
Oh, I think probably fewer than, we have about 200 roughly, and it's been fairly constant for, I'd say, the last 10 years or so, maybe declining somewhat, but not always. And I'd say maybe 15 or 20 men at most, so it's not a big percentage.
Okay, it's a small percentage, but it sounds like
But the ones who are involved are really an asset to the organization.
Right, right. You mentioned yet another role that you had, which was in voter services. And do you want to describe some of your experience in that area? I know that that the league has got sort of an advocacy area, and then
the education part and
voter services. Excuse me.
Right.
Oh, education. That's right.
Yeah, we sort of think of two hats: the education hat and the advocacy hat. The advocacy hat would be doing the lobbying. The education is like some of our studies and making our meetings open to the public just for general information about, you know, in the last few months there's been ones on agriculture in Boulder County, there's been one coming up on housing issues and so on, and those are more to present material, to facilitate discussion by anybody who cares to come to the meeting. Voter service has to kind of play a fine line, because on the one hand, we want to educate people about ballot issues, and also we want to educate people so they know about the candidates, what they value, what they stand for. I think less emphasis on what their record is, because we don't feel that the person who's the incumbent necessarily ought to have an advantage over a newcomer who's a candidate for a position. But so there's kind of two parts of voter service. One is to do with the people. So the candidate forums, when I was involved some years ago in that, we used to do a candidate question answer that was published in the newspaper. We had an arrangement with the Colorado Daily, so we would send the candidates the questions, the league would compose the questions. We had kind of a committee that sat down and said, you know, what are the significant issues, what would be helpful to people to hear about, and then the newspaper took on the piece of getting it published and distributing it so more people would have access to that information. So candidates, the league never supports or opposes individual candidates. On the other hand, the two hats that leaguers wear is tricky when you're doing voter service on the issues. because issues are things that the league board can decide. You know, we have reached a position through member consensus and study over the years, and according to this position we support such and such. Well, here's a ballot issue comes along and they're proposing this, and whatever the position would tend to say, well, yes, we ought to support that because that's in line with our position. So sometimes we are criticized if either we don't keep the two sides separate, or if other people just know that league takes a position and feel that how can they possibly give an impartial explanation of both sides on an issue, since their organization is also advocating for one side or the other. So that's probably a difficult thing to do that we'll have with us, I'm sure, for as long as the league is around.
So that's just a built-in kind of tension.
Yes, that's a good way to describe it.
People are just kind of juggle with that and understand that it's a tension, and just kind of know how to handle the situation.
One of the guidelines they give us if we are asked to go to a group and talk about ballot issues, we'll explain, you know, this is what the provisions of the ballot, if it passed, such and such would be the case. If it didn't pass, you know, it would be more or less status quo. And then if they, usually depending on the amount of time, we might just highlight a few of the arguments on the proponents and a few of the arguments on the opponents, or we might go into more detail, or if there's not a lot of time, we may just leave it at the description of what the provisions of the measure would be. We often say that the league does take a stand on some. Because this is an educational event, I'm not going to tell you what the league positions are, but if you have a burning desire to know, I'll stick around a little bit after the meeting and you can come up and ask me and I'll fill you in. So that's one way we have found people seem to be able to understand and accept as a way to toe that line and not go away with, at least most people don't go away feeling we've tried to influence them to vote in accord with the league position. Of course, you know, you do talk to people, some people who say, well, I want to know how the league stands on it so I can vote that way. And, you know, if that's how they feel about it, you know, we're not going to tell them they shouldn't do that. But I think we will also say, you know, you ought to really understand it thoroughly yourself and not just take the league's word for it, but feel that that fits with your own understanding of issues from your background and from what your values are.
Speaking about sort of this education as well, now you also, the league publishes, I don't know if you'd call them position papers or maybe that's my question. Do you publish guidelines or kind of information about issues for the public?
One of the things that if a group of people in a community that doesn't have a local league want to start and form a league, if there's enough of them to form a nucleus and do it, one of the first things in the process of getting their credentials approved by the state and national organization is that they need to carry out a study of their community. So they put together, and oftentimes it is published then as a little manual or a booklet or a brochure. Here's what kind, you know, a mayor, city council, or whatever sort of government, or the county, however it is, and other features that make their community unique, what the school district is, maybe it's something about the history. So oftentimes those publications would be copies printed up, made available. Nowadays, I think you'd be as likely to find maybe they get a website and put the information online. That makes it easier to change so that things don't get out of date too quickly. So through the years, other ones that I think were the local league has done is we had Tess McNulty, who was a real expert in the water issues. So there was, and she worked, I think, at the state level, but an explanation of water rights in Colorado and some of the peculiar things, the different river basins that drain the state, and all kinds of information on that. And I think at one point the state lead had such a pile of them, and they felt that, you know, the laws had changed, and we really can't, these are not of value anymore because it's become outdated. So they actually had to pitch some of it. But other times when we realize that this is getting close to that point of no longer being as useful as it was when it's first printed, we may decide, you know, let's give a copy to each of the schools locally, or let's, you know, put them for giveaway in the city hall. But you know, if we can, we feel they have some value, and especially when they're first out, make it available for people to purchase. Not that we want to make a big profit, because I think we're being league, we're more interested in getting the information out and educating people. There was some on some of the growth issues. I forget, it had a catchy title. It escapes me right now, but and there's been several publications since I've been about housing in the area, and the need for affordable housing, different strategies that some of the local communities have used to kind of increase their stock of affordable housing. And it's actually quite interesting, because the strategies that say Longmont uses are different than the city of Boulder and different than Lafayette and whatnot, but they're each community finds its own way to get to achieving some of those things.
Well, before I go on to kind of issues, one of the areas that people have remarked upon is the change in communications and the communication revolution because of the internet and personal computers. And I'm wondering if you had any observations about the communication revolution and the league, and what
yeah, I mean, just day to day, that has affected the way we do business. As membership secretary, one of the things, responsibilities, is printing up the address labels that when we send out a newsletter, which we used to send out hard copy, bulk rate mail, you have a little group of people, party that sits around the table, and they stick the labels on once they come back from the printer, and then somebody takes them to the post office, and a few days later people get it in their mailbox. We used to have to pad our list, so we'd have the 200 minimum that you need for the bulk mail rates. Well, and then at some point we had to stop and evaluate how many people have email. Postage rates are going up. You know, maybe we'd be better off getting the information that's in the paper voter to people in a different form, so they could get it in their inbox on their email account. So right now we have, I would say, maybe 80% of our members get some of their league communication by email. This last month we had about 40 labels only that I had to put out, and that's a mix. Some of those people only get paper because they're not comfortable using internet. Some of them are members who do have email, and they get the action alerts, things like that, and read those by email, but because of vision issues or whatever, or just comfort, they like to have the paper that they can flip the pages. So we, if they request, we're happy to give them a paper voter.
Any other impacts on the organization?
Nominating committee, I know when we think about who might be serving on the board, if we find somebody does not have or does not regularly use email, that really causes us to hesitate before nominating someone to the board. They might be very skilled and very interested, but so much of that communication between board members is by email. So a person would really be at a disadvantage if they had to, and it would be just an inconvenience for the board members if they're accustomed to just being able to, here's my group list for everybody that needs this sort of material, send it out, but then have to take those exceptions and make sure they get it either with a phone call or sticking a stamp on a letter. So yes, that has been a factor.
So it's really basically now an organization that is based around communication through email, websites, and
now at
such.
the last convention they were encouraging people to do, you know, twits and Facebook and blogs and all of these, and take advantage of some of this as a way to bring in younger people and make ourselves more relevant. And you know, there may be some leagues that have really gotten into that in a big way, but I would not, there's no way I would describe Boulder Valley as being one of those.
Okay, so you're not on Twitter yet.
No, we're not out at the forefront of the communication revolution, really.
Well, in some ways, you know, just having a great website and all the email stuff is, you know, I mean, if it works, you know, that people are communicating and you're effective, then that's the important thing, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess there's always that long range kind of planning that comes in. And I don't know. Does the National actually have Facebook and Twitter that the local members here can kind of give them a lot of feedback?
I think they say yes, you know, we want to get so many likes, and so, you know, encouraging people to subscribe to those. And they were doing a lot of that live from convention so that people could get you know, a feed of some, or maybe not live, but shortly after they would post video from some of the sessions at National for people at home that would have an interest in following those. They've done some webinars. I attended one that was kind of what to expect if you're going to the convention. You know, here are some tips on what to look for, where to find things, so forth. So yeah, they're doing some of that.
Well, now I'd like to maybe change a little bit of a direction and ask you about some of the important issues that have commanded the attention of the league, and then maybe you could describe maybe some issues that really interest you and that you've studied and worked with.
Sure. I guess sort of the overarching thing is, one of the appeals I think that League has is that it is a multi-issue organization. You know, we have everything from the natural resources end of it to people who are more interested in specific government topics, you know, voting and campaign finance and some of those things. And then others around social policy matters. The ones, and I don't know, it's kind of hard to say what has been most the big issues for Boulder and this community. I guess growth is a perennial issue. You know, the business people that think it's good to have growth and development, and some of the other people who realize that there are drawbacks. You get too much congestion, you know, too much of a good thing. And so I'd say in one form or another that's been an issue that keeps cropping up. The issues I've been involved myself are more things that have interested me because of intersection personal life and whatnot. So, you know, as my kids were growing up and in the school system, the schools committee was something I've been participated in some of their work.
Can you give an example of what you might be interested in about the schools?
Okay, I think I might have been one of the ones to suggest, because, you know, question on my kids of getting along and, you know, conflicts with schoolmates and so on. So we did a study at one point on what kind of programs schools have to introduce kids to ideas around conflict resolution and bully-proof programs, that type of thing. So we sort of took an inventory of what at that time we were the Boulder Valley, so we didn't go up to see what was happening in St. Vrain, but we looked at what sort of programs are, what sort of resources are available for schools that want to offer kids programs that help in that kind of area. I have been sort of participated in the housing committee. I don't think that was as much my own interest as sort of happened. They needed somebody to observe the Louisville Housing Authority meetings, and the person who had been doing it was not able to continue, so I did that and kind of got pulled in that area. Immigration committee was something that I became involved with when the National League had passed at one of the conventions, you know, we're going to do a study of immigration. And I learned a lot from that. That was where we were preparing materials for our local units to have a consensus process, and then our results gathered with those from all over the country of other units, and then the National League analyzed everybody's responses and said, you know, here's our position based on, that's kind of the grassroots way they go about it. So in that case, I guess that was an issue that I think around the country more and more, instead of at one time, I think immigrants were concentrated on the coasts, the ports of entry, you know, New York, California, whatnot, and now it's...
You gotta go. Now.
Okay. I guess I'll have to cut it at that, but yeah, nowadays we have immigrants in all the states in the center of the country as well as the coast, and so I think for all around that's a relevant topic to study.
Well, since you have to make a
Yes.
plain connection, I'll thank you, and perhaps we'll see about continuing in the future. But thank you very much for meeting you this afternoon.
Okay, I'd be happy to see what we could arrange for later, and thanks for the opportunity.